The storm roared like an angry animal, lashing rain against the windows. My arms ached from holding my baby tight to my chest, her cries muffled against my damp shoulder. I banged on the door, my knuckles raw. Inside, I could hear laughter, my parents' laughter, muffled by the glass but sharp enough to cut through the thunder. The curtains shifted, just enough for me to see my mother's smirk before she yanked them shut. My father's voice carried faintly through the wood, "Let the storm deal with the garbage." That garbage was me. I used to think mornings were my safest time. The world hadn't yet had the chance to hurt me. At 25, I built a fragile routine: wake early, boil water for tea, hum soft songs to calm my baby while the kettle hissed. The little flat I rented above a corner shop was cramped, but it was mine. The paint peeled, and the floor groaned, but the sunlight that leaked through the crooked blinds felt like forgiveness. I worked at a small library downtown 3 days a week. The pay was thin, but books were patient friends. The smell of old paper and ink calmed me when life outside grew sharp. The regulars, an old man who read the same newspaper every day, a mother who borrowed picture books for her twins, treated me with more kindness than my own blood ever had. Every morning, as I dressed my baby, I reminded myself, she is my world. She will know love, even if I never did. I pressed kisses into her soft hair, promising her what had never been promised to me. My parents lived only a mile away, in the house where I grew up. A house with polished floors, tall windows, and laughter that was always cruel if directed at me. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect family: my father, the respected businessman; my mother, the picture of refinement; my younger brother and sister, spoiled and golden in their parents' eyes. And me, the shadow in the corner, the mistake that wouldn't disappear. The contrast was striking. My siblings were showered with gifts and praise. New cars for their birthdays, holidays abroad, framed certificates of achievements that my parents boasted about at every gathering. I was rarely invited to those gatherings, and when I was, I became the joke. "Clumsy girl," my father would say with a chuckle that made the guests laugh along. She was always slow. My mother would sigh and remind me how grateful I should be that they let me stay nearby. I didn't tell many people about the stormy night yet. It was still raw, almost unbelievable, but even before that night, I had long known my place in their eyes. A helper. A scapegoat. A convenient target for the anger they never showed anyone else. Still, I kept visiting sometimes, hoping foolishly that the birth of my daughter might soften them. Maybe they'd see her tiny fingers curled around mine and remember that I was their child too. Sometimes my mother would hold the baby, her eyes narrowing as if testing whether the child resembled me too much. My father hardly looked at her at all. Yet, despite everything, I found small sparks of joy. The evenings when I'd rock my baby to sleep and watch her chest rise and fall. The quiet walks to the park, where I'd sit on a damp bench and let the wind carry away my loneliness. The way my daughter's laugh, high and sudden, could split the heaviness in my chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. That was my world, fragile, imperfect, but mine. I told myself I didn't need their approval anymore. I told myself their cruelty didn't matter. But deep down, some part of me still longed for the thing I never had: parents who wanted me. And that longing was what made their betrayal cut so deep the night the storm came. Looking back, I realize betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's built, brick by brick, through small cruelties that people convince you to accept as normal. When I was a child, my brother and sister were the stars of the house. My mother brushed my sister's hair every night, weaving it into perfect braids, while mine tangled because she said, "You never sit still long enough." My father taught my brother how to ride a bike in the driveway, cheering when he pedaled on his own. When it was my turn, he let go of the handlebars before I was ready. I crashed into the hedge, my knees bleeding, and he shook his head. "Pathetic," he muttered. I learned early that in our family, I was entertainment only when I failed. At birthdays, I was the one asked to serve cake, to clean up wrapping paper, to pose awkwardly in group photos where everyone leaned away from me. It was subtle, invisible to outsiders, but crushing to a little girl who wanted to be chosen. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped asking for their approval. I saved what little money I made from part-time jobs, hoping one day to leave. But when I found out I was pregnant at 24, everything grew more complicated. My boyfriend, if you could even call him that, vanished the moment I told him. My parents sneered. Of course he left. Who would want the burden of you? My mother said, stirring sugar into her tea as if she were discussing the weather. I wanted to scream, to throw the cup across the room, to finally demand why they hated me so much. But the baby inside me needed calm. So I stayed quiet, biting my tongue until it bled. The pregnancy was hard. Long hours at work, swollen ankles, nights where I slept sitting up because the cramps were too much. My parents didn't visit the hospital when my daughter was born. They sent a text 2 days later, "Congratulations. Don't expect help from us." Still, some desperate part of me hoped they would change once they saw her. I thought maybe her innocence would melt something in them. I was wrong. One afternoon, when my daughter was 3 months old, I brought her to their house, wrapped in a pink blanket. My sister had friends over, they cooed over the baby, but not kindly. "She's cute," one of them said, "though I hope she doesn't grow up looking like you." Laughter erupted, sharp as broken glass. My mother didn't correct them. She just poured more drinks. Another time, I asked if they could watch the baby for a few hours while I attended a job interview. My father leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You chose to ruin your life, not us. Don't drag us down with you." That was the first moment I felt real heat inside me, not sadness, but anger. I left without another word, clutching my daughter like a shield. But nothing prepared me for the night of the storm. It started with a phone call. My electricity had gone out in the flat, the rain pouring through a leak in the ceiling. My baby's blanket was soaked. Desperate, I called my parents, asking if I could come by just until the worst passed. There was silence on the line before my mother sighed. "Fine. But don't drip water on the floors." Relief flooded me as I wrapped my daughter in the driest blanket I had left and hurried through the storm. By the time I reached their door, lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. My arms shook from holding my baby so tightly, shielding her from the wind. I knocked, then banged. I called out, "Please, it's me." At first, I thought they couldn't hear over the thunder. But then the curtain shifted, and I saw them, my mother, my father, even my sister, standing in the warm glow of the living room. Our eyes met through the glass. For a heartbeat, I thought they would open the door. Instead, my mother smirked and drew the curtain shut. Then came my father's voice, loud enough to slice through the storm. "Let the storm deal with the garbage." The word echoed inside me. Garbage. Not daughter. Not mother of their grandchild. Garbage. I stood there, rain pounding on my back, my baby whimpering against my chest, and realized something broke inside me that night. It wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment so deliberate, so cruel, that I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Months passed after the storm, but the memory clung to me like damp clothes that never dried. I worked, cared for my daughter, and smiled politely at neighbors, but inside, a shadow lived. Every time thunder rumbled in the distance, I felt my heart pound with the memory of their laughter through the glass. I told myself I would never return to that house. And for a while, I didn't. I built walls around my little life, thin ones, fragile ones, but walls all the same. Then came the invitation. It arrived in the post, embossed and heavy, with gold lettering that mocked me. My sister was getting engaged, and the family planned a grand celebration at a local banquet hall. Everyone was invited. Everyone, including me. At first, I considered tearing it up. But then I saw the small note scribbled at the bottom in my mother's handwriting: "Do not embarrass us. If you come, dress properly." The words crawled under my skin. After locking me out in a storm, after calling me garbage, they still assumed I would obediently show up to decorate their lives like a prop. Against my better judgment, I went. The hall was lit with crystal chandeliers, tables dressed in white linen, glasses sparkling in neat rows. My father stood near the entrance, shaking hands, chest puffed out with pride. My mother hovered nearby, her smile polished and false. When they saw me, their expressions tightened. My mother's eyes flicked over my dress, simple but clean, the best I could afford, and she whispered something sharp into my father's ear. "Surprised you dared to come," he said, handing me a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was invited," I replied quietly, shifting my baby's weight on my hip. She squirmed, curious at the lights and noise. My sister appeared, glowing in her glittering gown, surrounded by friends. She looked at me as if I were a smudge on glass. "Oh. You made it." Her tone was flat, her eyes already sliding away. I found a seat near the back, far from the center of celebration. Guests glanced at me curiously, some smiling politely, others whispering. I kept my gaze low, feeding my daughter mashed banana from a small container I'd brought. Then, midway through the speeches, it happened. My father took the stage, tapping the microphone. His voice filled the hall, confident and smooth. "Tonight, we celebrate not just my daughter's engagement, but the strength of this family. A family built on success, on loyalty, on pride." The words stung. Success. Loyalty. Pride. Words they had never extended to me. He went on, praising my sister's fiancé, recalling his son's academic achievements, even thanking my mother for her endless devotion. Laughter, applause, admiration, all of it circling the room, none of it touching me. And then, the final twist of the knife. "I am proud," he said, pausing dramatically, "that our family has never been burdened by failure. We rise above weakness. We stand tall, untarnished." His eyes flicked to me in that moment. A small gesture, almost invisible, but enough. I felt heat flood my face as the implication rippled through the crowd. Some guests glanced toward me, piecing together the meaning. It wasn't just exclusion. It was a public erasure. A rewriting of history where I, and my struggles, my child, did not exist, except as a stain he could boast of overcoming. My hands trembled as I gathered my baby into my arms. She was drowsy, her head resting against my shoulder, unaware of the humiliation burning through me. I wanted to leave. To vanish into the night, as I had so many times before. But something stopped me. A thought, sharp and sudden: if I keep leaving, they will keep winning. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep in our tiny flat, my father's words replayed in my mind. Never been burdened by failure. Untarnished. They wanted to erase me, to strip me of dignity, to laugh as I begged in the rain. But I wasn't garbage. I wasn't failure. For the first time, the anger inside me burned brighter than the fear. And deep in that anger, a seed of resolve began to grow. Sleep abandoned me after the engagement night. I lay in the dark, listening to the slow rhythm of my daughter's breathing, the tick of the old wall clock, the wind rattling against the loose windowpane. My mind replayed every word my father had said, every laugh I'd endured over the years, every time I'd been shoved to the edge of the family and told to be grateful for the view. I closed my eyes, but instead of rest, memories came. I remembered the night of the storm again, but sharper now, like glass pressed against my skin. The rain soaking through my clothes, the baby's weak cries, my mother's smirk framed by warm yellow light. I had begged them with my eyes, begged without words, but they had turned away. And then I thought of the engagement speech, the way my father had erased me in front of a room full of people, as if I didn't exist, as if I had never mattered. For years, I had told myself that survival was enough. That if I could keep my baby safe, keep a roof over her head, then I had already won. But that night, lying awake in the dark, I realized survival was only half the battle. Because they hadn't just tried to destroy my present. They were trying to poison my daughter's future too. Someday she would grow up, and she would hear whispers. She would hear the version of the story my parents told, that her mother was weak, that she was a burden, that she was garbage. That thought twisted something inside me. My breath came shallow, my hands clenched into fists beneath the blanket. No, I whispered into the dark, my voice trembling but firm. Not her. She won't carry my chains. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The wooden floor was cold beneath my feet. I pressed my palms to my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. For 25 years, I had been silent. But silence hadn't protected me. Silence had been their weapon. Images flickered in my head like scenes from a film. My father's boastful smile. My mother's cold laughter. My siblings' mocking voices. And, buried beneath all of it, the truth, the reality of what had happened, what they had done to me. That was when it struck me, truth. They built their power on lies, on polished appearances and curated reputations. They thrived on what people believed about them. If I could take that from them, if I could show the world what they really were, I could finally be free. But fear crept in, slippery and familiar. What if no one believes me? What if it backfires? What if they make me look even smaller? I paced the room, the floor creaking softly. My daughter stirred, sighing in her sleep, and I froze until she settled again. Her tiny hand peeked out from beneath the blanket, curled into a fist. That little hand gave me courage. For her, I could not afford to fail. For her, I had to be more than the shadow they'd painted me as. I began to imagine it, gathering the pieces, the evidence, the memories. Not a scream, not a tantrum, but something undeniable. Documents. Stories. Witnesses. The things they had hidden. The things they assumed I was too broken to ever reveal. The idea was terrifying. But it was also intoxicating. For the first time, I felt something other than despair. I felt fire. That night I did not sleep. I wrote instead, page after page, filling an old notebook with everything I could remember. Dates. Events. Words they had said. Times I had been humiliated. Times they had turned me away. The storm night, in detail. The engagement speech. My mother's insults. My father's neglect. By dawn, my hand ached, my eyes burned, but I felt lighter. The pages were messy, ink smudged, but they were real. They were my life, my truth. I pressed my palm against the stack of paper as the first week's sunlight crept through the blinds. My decision was set. I would not wait for storms to pass. I would become the storm. The first days after I made my decision felt almost unreal. I woke up with an unusual clarity, as if the world had shifted during the night. But clarity didn't mean courage. Every time I thought about what I was planning, my stomach twisted. These were my parents, my family. The people who were supposed to protect me. Exposing them felt dangerous, almost like betraying myself. But then I would look at my daughter, her wide, trusting eyes, her tiny hands grasping at my shirt, and I remembered, they had already betrayed me. I started small. During lunch breaks at the library, I searched through old public records. My father had always bragged about his spotless reputation, about running his business with honor. But I remembered overhearing things as a child, hushed phone calls, sudden bursts of anger, nights when he came home reeking of alcohol but told people he had been at a meeting. The library's archives didn't lie. I found mentions of late payments, fines, small lawsuits quietly settled. Nothing huge, but enough to show cracks. I copied everything into a folder, my hands trembling as I fed coins into the copier machine. Next, I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in years. An old neighbor who remembered how my mother used to scream at me in the driveway. A teacher who once pulled me aside after class to ask if everything was okay at home. A friend of my sister's who admitted she always felt uncomfortable with how cruel my family was toward me. Some were hesitant to talk, worried about getting involved. But others surprised me. They remembered. They had seen. Their voices, their memories, gave weight to mine. Still, the setbacks came quickly. One evening, my brother showed up at my flat. He stood in the doorway, his cologne too strong, his smile too polished. "Word is you've been asking questions," he said. I stiffened, holding my daughter tighter. And he leaned closer, lowering his voice, "You should stop. Whatever game you're playing, it won't end well for you." His words chilled me. "Is that a threat?" "Call it advice," he said, smirking before walking away. That night, fear clawed at me again. I thought about giving up. About burning the folder of papers and forgetting the whole thing. But then my daughter woke crying, and as I rocked her back to sleep, I whispered, "I won't let them scare me anymore." The next setback came from within. Doubt. One afternoon, after work, I sat at my small kitchen table staring at the growing stack of notes. My hands shook as I thought, who will even care? I'm just one woman with a sad story. They're powerful. They're respected. What chance do I have? The doubts whispered louder than any storm. Maybe I was garbage after all. Maybe exposing them would just make me look bitter. But then I remembered the banquet hall, the smug smile on my father's face as he declared his family untarnished. The way guests had looked at me, pitying, confused, as though I were invisible. That memory reignited the fire. I reminded myself, I wasn't doing this to win applause. I was doing it to reclaim truth. Slowly, my plan sharpened. I began organizing everything, a timeline of events, statements from people willing to speak, public documents that contradicted my father's perfect image. I even found an old photo in a forgotten shoebox, me at 16, standing outside in the rain after being kicked out for missing curfew. My sister, dry and smug, stood in the doorway behind me. That picture said more than paragraphs ever could. But gathering truth was only half the battle. The question was, where would I tell it? At first, I thought about posting everything online. Social media was powerful, yes, but also dangerous. Posts could be deleted. Lies could spread faster than truth. Then I thought of the local newspaper. The editor was a stern woman who had once visited the library for research help. I remembered the way she treated me, with respect, unlike my family. Maybe she would listen. I arranged a meeting. My hands trembled as I walked into her office, the folder heavy in my bag. She listened. Really listened. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "If what you're saying checks out, this could be something. But you need to be sure you're ready. Once this is out there, you can't take it back." Her words lingered with me for days. Was I ready? Then the final setback came, a storm of a different kind. One morning, I found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of my electricity bill, overdue. In red ink across the top someone had scrawled, take care of your own mess before you come for us." My stomach dropped. They knew. They were watching. For hours I sat frozen, my daughter babbling happily on the floor, unaware of the fear tightening around me. But as I looked at her, I realized that was exactly what they wanted. For me to freeze. For me to cower. So I didn't. Instead, I picked up the phone, called the editor, and said, "I'm ready." That night, after I put my daughter to bed, I sat at the table, spreading out every piece of paper, every photo, every note. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time in my life, I felt steady. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building a mirror. A mirror they couldn't shatter, no matter how hard they tried. And soon, I would make them look into it. The article came out on a Wednesday morning. It wasn't a headline splashed in red ink, but a quiet piece on page 3 of the local paper, Behind the Curtain, the hidden life of a respected family. My name was there, my voice woven through every paragraph. The story detailed years of neglect, emotional abuse, favoritism, and the night of the storm. It included photos, copies of records, and statements from witnesses. I held the paper in my trembling hands, my daughter balanced on my knee. She reached out and smacked the page with her tiny palm, laughing as if she knew. I kissed her hair and whispered, "We did it." By noon, the whispers had begun. Neighbors glanced at me differently when I walked to the shop. At the library, a coworker touched my arm gently and said, "I read your story. I'm so sorry. You're brave." But the real storm broke that evening. The banquet hall, the same place where I had been humiliated, was hosting a charity dinner my father had organized. Journalists were there. Cameras. My father loved the spotlight too much to cancel. I stood at the back, unnoticed at first, my daughter asleep in her stroller. I watched as my father worked the room, shaking hands, smiling, pretending nothing had changed. My mother hovered near him, her pearls gleaming, her expression brittle. My siblings clung close, whispering nervously. Then the questions started. "Mr. Khan," a reporter asked, notebook in hand, "how do you respond to the claims in today's paper? That your family turned away your daughter during a storm?" The smile faltered. For a heartbeat, I saw a panic flicker in his eyes. But he recovered quickly, laughing it off. "Baseless lies," he said. "Disgruntled nonsense." More questions followed. About lawsuits. About neighbors' testimonies. About the teacher who confirmed my years of neglect. The cameras caught every hesitation, every crack in his composure. Finally, I stepped forward. The crowd shifted as people recognized me. Whispers rippled. My father's face drained of color. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "You can call me a liar," I said, my voice steady, carrying through the hall. "You can deny everything. But you cannot erase the truth." I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the nearest table. Inside were the documents, photos, statements. Copies of everything I had given the paper. "If anyone wants to see for themselves," I continued, "it's all here. Every word. Every proof." The silence was heavy, broken only by the clicking of cameras. My mother hissed, "How dare you?" but her voice cracked, sharp and desperate, nothing like the polished tone she usually wore. "You dared first," I replied softly. "When you left me in the rain. When you called me garbage. When you tried to erase me in front of everyone. Tonight, I am not silent anymore." My father tried to laugh again, but it was hollow. "She's unstable," he told the crowd. "She's always been difficult." But even as he spoke, a man in the audience, our old neighbor, stood up. "I saw her that night," he said firmly. "In the storm. Holding her baby. They shut the curtains on her. Gasps echoed around the room. Another voice joined in. The teacher who had once asked if I was okay. She's telling the truth, she said. I saw how they treated her. We all did. We stayed quiet. The silence that followed was not on my shoulders anymore. It was on theirs. My family. My parents. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their polite masks cracking as they realized the perfect family they had admired was nothing but a facade. My father's face turned red, his jaw clenched. My mother's hand shook as she clutched her pearls. My siblings looked away, shame and fear etched on their features. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg. The truth spoke louder than anything else. After a long, heavy pause, I turned back to my daughter's stroller. She stirred, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. I pushed her gently toward the exit. As I reached the door, I looked back once. Not to gloat, not to revel, but to mark the moment. The image of them standing there, exposed, cornered, crumbling, would stay with me forever. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one drowning in the storm. They were. The night after the banquet, the city felt quieter than it had in years. Or maybe it was just me. I sat by the window in my small apartment, my daughter asleep in her crib. Outside, the streetlights hummed. A drizzle softened the edges of everything. I pressed my palm against the cold glass and exhaled, long and slow, as though I'd been holding my breath for decades. The paper lay on the table, tomorrow's edition. This time, the headline was bolder: Community Voices confirm abuse allegations against Khan family. A photo of me, folder in hand, speaking in the banquet hall, took up half the page. I wasn't humiliated anymore. I wasn't invisible. I was seen. But seeing came with weight. My phone buzzed endlessly, messages from strangers, some full of support, others brimming with bitterness. You're so strong. I believe you. How could you do this to your own parents? Ungrateful. Attention seeker. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the smallest things. Rocking my baby back to sleep when she stirred. Stirring sugar into my tea. Folding tiny clothes that smelled of detergent and innocence. The storm outside was gone. But the storm inside, grief, relief, exhaustion, still swirled. A week later, I returned to the library. I expected stares, whispers. And yes, they came. But alongside them came something I hadn't expected: kindness. The head librarian smiled warmly. Take your time settling back in. We're glad you're here. A teenager lingered by the desk, cheeks pink. I read your story, she said softly. My family, they hurt me too. I thought no one would believe me. But now, maybe they will. Her words cut deeper than any insult could. They reminded me that my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror for others, too. At night, I wrote. Not just reports or notes, but chapters. Pieces of memory. Pages of storms and silences. Words that turned pain into shape. I didn't know if they would ever become a book, but I knew they were becoming something. One afternoon, I passed by my parents' house. I hadn't planned to, but my feet carried me there. The curtains were still drawn, but this time the house looked smaller, shrunken under the weight of its secrets. A "for sale" sign leaned in the yard. I stood across the street, my daughter's hand clutching mine. She looked up at me, curious. Mama. Just a house, I whispered, squeezing her fingers. That's all it ever was. And for the first time, I believed it. The fear that had once chained me to their rejection was gone. The hunger for their approval, their acknowledgement, had burned out. They had tried to bury me in silence, but silence had become my weapon instead, quiet patience, quiet strength, quiet revenge. Revenge that wasn't about destruction. It was about survival. Exposure. Truth. Months passed. My siblings kept their distance. My mother tried, once, to call me, her voice sharp even through the static. "You've ruined us. Are you proud?" I listened for a few seconds, then hung up. I didn't owe her an answer. What I owed was to my daughter. To myself. So I built. Slowly. Quietly. The library offered me a permanent position. I accepted. I joined a support group for women who had survived family betrayal. I spoke, trembling at first, then steadier, as I shared my story. Each time, the room nodded, cried, reached out. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others heal. And in those circles, I learned something unexpected. My story wasn't the darkest. Others had endured worse. But pain wasn't a competition. Each of us carried storms. Each of us had found, or was still searching for, our way back into the light. One evening, as the sun set in molten streaks across the horizon, I held my daughter on my lap and whispered, "You'll never stand outside in the rain, begging for love. Not while I'm here." She giggled, her tiny fingers tugging my hair, unaware of the weight of my promise. I smiled, tears pricking my eyes, not from grief, but from something gentler. Relief. Hope. The shift had happened. I was no longer the girl banging on doors, waiting to be let in. I was the woman who had built her own doorway. I often think back to that storm. The way the rain stung my skin, the way thunder rattled my bones, the way my baby's cries mixed with the howl of the wind. I can still hear my father's voice, muffled but clear, "Let the storm deal with the garbage." For a long time, those words lived inside me like shards of glass. Every step, every breath, cut me open a little more. I thought I was garbage. I thought I had to prove I wasn't. But now, standing at my own window years later, I see it differently. The storm wasn't my punishment. It was my baptism. The rain washed away the lies I had been fed my whole life, the lie that I was unworthy, the lie that love had to be earned through silence, the lie that blood was thicker than truth. My parents wanted me broken, dependent, desperate for their approval. Instead, they made me stronger. They made me someone who could look at cruelty and say, "No more." My daughter sleeps soundly in her bed. She is growing into her own little world, full of laughter and sticky hands and bedtime stories. She doesn't know the weight of the past I carry, and I don't plan on giving it to her. That's the gift, the cycle stops here. Sometimes I wonder if my parents still think of me. If they regret what they did. If their house, wherever they are now, still feels like a fortress, or if it feels like a prison built from their own choices. But the truth is, I don't need their regret anymore. I don't even need their apology. What I needed was freedom. And I found it. I found it in telling my story. I found it in the quiet hours of the library, in the rustle of pages and the comfort of words. I found it in the faces of women who told me, "Me too." And most of all, I found it in my daughter's small hand curled around mine, warm and alive and full of a future. The storm they left me in could have destroyed me. Instead, it shaped me. And when I close my eyes, I no longer see myself shivering on that doorstep, begging to be let in. I see myself walking away, baby in my arms, rain soaking my hair, thunder at my back, not as a victim, but as a beginning. Because sometimes revenge isn't fire or fury. Sometimes it's just living. Living well. Living free. And that, I've learned, is the kind of revenge no storm can ever wash away.